My name is Colette, 39 years old, currently living in Denver and running a small interior design studio that I built with all my heart. That evening, on my birthday, I didn't receive flowers, no wishes, not even a phone call from the man who had shared my life for the past 11 years. Instead, a stranger walked into the restaurant, handed me a sealed envelope, then left as if completing a delivery. Inside was a divorce petition. And a cold note. David has moved to Seattle. Please sign quickly to avoid complications. Have you ever been betrayed at the exact moment that was supposed to be unforgettable? What would you do if the person you trusted most stabbed you in the back with a piece of paper colder than ice? If you've ever felt that way, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to hear the rest of the story, because what happened next, David never saw coming. I sat silently in my car for nearly an hour after that abandoned birthday dinner, still holding that icy envelope in my hand. The streetlights slid past the windshield like flashes of memory, quick, blurred, and sometimes piercing. Part of me wanted to call David to ask him how he could be so cruel, but another part, stronger and steadier, remained quiet. Maybe because I had sensed something for a while. I began piecing everything together. Small details that once seemed harmless, now glowing strangely with new meaning. The sudden business trips, often on weekends, sometimes just days apart. I remember asking him once, "Didn't you just go to Seattle last week?" He laughed without meeting my eyes and said, "The schedule changed. The project's urgent." I believed him, because I wanted to believe him. Then came the moment he changed his phone password, claiming the company tightened internal security. Even his laptop had its own lock. One night, I heard a message tone while he was in the shower. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, Jenna. The message was just a red heart emoji and the words, "Miss you already." I asked him who Jenna was. David didn't take long to answer. New assistant. Great at her job, but maybe a little overly friendly. Don't worry about it. He said that, then shifted the conversation, suggesting I scale back my design projects to make more time for myself. I listened, nodded, but something began to settle in my chest. A feeling I couldn't name yet. Not quite suspicion, but definitely not trust. The next week, I received our credit card statement. New charges appeared. An upscale seafood restaurant downtown, 2 tickets to a musical in Seattle, a bill for an expensive bottle of wine from California. David told me he had lunch with clients and bought the wine as a gift for a business partner. I didn't ask further, but I quietly downloaded the past 3 months of statements and saved them to a private hard drive at the studio. My birthday was the last drop. I had no reason to stay silent anymore. The next morning, I called the family's private law office, where I used to work before opening my studio. They referred me to a real estate specialist named Marcus, a man who could track property transactions nationwide. When I told him I needed to know whether David had any properties under his name in other states, Marcus took just 2 hours to send me the results. A 2-bedroom condo in Seattle, transfer completed 3 months ago. The registered owner was someone named Jenna Matthews. But the co-signer on the mortgage? David Carter. My husband. I stared at the bold letters on the screen as if they might disappear if I closed my eyes. I had my suspicions, but part of me had still hoped I was wrong. Now there was nothing left to deny. That afternoon I went to the bank. The teller, who knew me, Linda, smiled warmly. "Hi Colette, what can I help you with today?" I pressed my lips together, keeping my composure. "I'd like to review all recent transactions in our joint investment account." Linda typed a few lines, then frowned slightly. "That account? All the shares were liquidated yesterday. Perhaps you haven't been notified." I looked at her without blinking. Where was the money transferred? To a personal account, solely under Mr. David Carter's name. The transaction was processed yesterday morning. I gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've been notified. Thank you." Leaving the bank, I walked without really feeling the ground beneath my feet. It felt like layers of truth were dropping on me, one after another, relentlessly. The man who held my hand when my mother passed away, the man who promised we'd build a home together, grow old side by side, had silently stripped everything away from me in the dark. I stopped in the middle of a crowded sidewalk, watching the stream of people rush past, then pulled out my phone and called Vivian. Her voice came through calm but firm. "I've heard." Marcus filled me in. "Don't worry, Colette. We planned for this last month, remember? The studio ownership separation, the personal financial control clauses. And there's one more thing. I paused. What is it? He signed a liability clause stating he wouldn't withdraw joint funds without written consent. I've already submitted it to the state court. He won't be able to claim it was an accident. I let out a long breath, not from relief, but from the quiet confirmation that I was no longer blind. This time, no one would rewrite my life without my permission. I sat in my office, windows overlooking Denver's busy Main Street, but all outside sound seemed sealed off by the thick glass and the thoughts spinning through my mind. The bank statement still lay on my desk, next to my laptop, along with the condo photos Marcus had sent. I dialed Vivian's number. She picked up after the second ring, voice steady and composed as always. "I've been expecting this call," Vivian said as if she'd seen it all coming. "I guess you already know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I do. Marcus sent over everything. I've also reviewed the financial records between you two." I looked down at my hands, my fingers clenched so tightly they had gone pale. "He sold off all the investment shares. Transferred everything into a personal account under his name. I guess he hoped I'd be too hurt to notice. And hoped you wouldn't have any legal ground to fight back," Vivian added, concise. But he was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. "My records, the studio, is it still secure?" "Absolutely," she answered firmly. "You remember last year when I advised you to sign a property separation agreement for the studio? You asked, is it really necessary if I trust him?" I gave a short, bitter laugh. "I remember. And you said, in case people change. Or in case they were never as solid as you believed," Vivian said, not skipping a beat. "The studio is registered as fully independent personal property. All cash flow, loans, and transactions go through your personal account. David holds 0% ownership." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "And the joint investment? Is there any way to recover it?" Vivian paused briefly, then spoke slowly. "We'll sue him for misappropriating joint marital assets without consent. I have the clause he signed agreeing not to make any transfers without mutual authorization. That gives us the basis to request a freeze on any remaining assets if there are any left. And if he's spent it all, I still want him to face the consequences." Vivian wasn't surprised by my answer. She knew me. Not because I was petty, but because I had endured too much, trusted too long, and now it was time to stand up for myself. "We'll need to confirm what assets are still under his name," she continued. "Marcus is tracking his stock transactions. There's indication David's trying to offload company shares and disappear. Do you know what he's doing in Seattle?" "Not exactly," I sighed. "Just that he's living with his new assistant, Jenna. The condo is under her name. We'll review rental and mortgage records, and if needed, we can also investigate any loans under that woman's name, just in case David is using someone else's identity to hide assets. He used to mock me for separating my finances. Called it a lack of trust in marriage. I called it instinct. Better to call it intelligence," Vivian replied, calm but sharp. "Because without those documents, you'd have lost not just your studio and your career, but everything, except the man who betrayed you." I stayed silent for a long moment. In my mind flashed the memory of a birthday night 3 years ago. David stood in the kitchen holding me and said, "As long as you keep working this much, I'll never have all of you." I smiled then, continuing to tweak the layout on my design board. I thought I could balance both family and career. But for David, anything that didn't feed his ego was disposable. "Vivian, I need him to feel the weight of this betrayal. Not out of revenge, but so he understands, some women don't break just because they were left behind. And I'll help you make that happen, legally, transparently, and thoroughly," Vivian said slowly. "I don't work to hurt anyone. I work so justice can take its rightful place." I opened my laptop and began uploading all the files I'd stored over the past 6 months. Bank statements, suspicious receipts, screenshots of shady messages. Even small details like a plane ticket to Seattle with David's name clearly printed, the departure date falling exactly 1 day before my birthday. Each file was a reminder. I had seen the signs, I had felt them, but I hadn't dared believe. Now I had no doubt left. And David would soon learn that the woman he thought would be easy to discard was the same woman who had been preparing to protect herself all along. I came home late that night, after my meeting with Vivian ran longer than expected. My mind still spun with legal terms and a growing checklist of things to address. I only wanted to sink into the sofa and close my eyes for a while. But as I walked into my home office to retrieve a folder from the cabinet, I accidentally knocked over a small box of old charging cables and tech accessories I had nearly forgotten about. Among the jumble was an old phone, its edges chipped, the silver casing unmistakably familiar. My heart tightened. It was David's previous iPhone, the one he took with him on our Florida trip 2 months earlier. I remembered it clearly because when he returned, he claimed it had water damage from the ocean and couldn't be salvaged, so he replaced it. I picked it up and plugged it into a charger. Within a few minutes, the screen lit up, the Apple logo glowing softly in the dim room. I waited, feeling both anxious and curious. There was no password. That surprised me. Maybe David thought he had deleted everything. Or maybe he never imagined I would find it again. I opened the message app. The most recent thread was with someone saved as Jenna from just under 6 weeks ago. We need to make sure she doesn't find out anything until we've cleared everything out. David, I don't want any legal mess. The next message came from David himself. Don't worry. She's always too busy with her studio. You see it, right? Colette always thinks she's in control, but she's clueless. She won't notice anything until the money's all gone. Trust me. I scrolled further. Dozens of messages like it spilled down the screen, each like a knife to the gut. In some, he called me a fake queen, a woman with nothing attractive left but a stack of contracts. In others, he boasted to Jenna, saying she'll never dare confront me. Too scared to lose face. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my hands steady. The words were raw, vile. But strangely, I didn't feel pain the way I used to imagine I would. My heart was hardening, layer by layer, like frost slowly forming on a window pane on a cold winter morning. I moved to the voice memo app. There were 2 audio files. One, over 10 minutes long, sounded like a conversation in a car, likely between David and Jenna. I pressed play. As soon as we sell off the rest of the stock, that's it. Then we drain the retirement account. She'll just think it's market fluctuation. She won't trace it. Jenna laughed, high-pitched. I just hope I don't get dragged into anything if she catches on. David chuckled. Trust me, she's too buried in that damn studio of hers. Colette doesn't question anything. A few seconds of silence. Then Jenna's voice softened. Did you ever really love her? I did, David said without pause. But she's the past. I need someone who understands me, makes me feel alive again. You make me feel that. I stopped the recording there. Their giddy laughter rang through the room once more, hitting the part of me that had once trusted, once hoped, once been blind. I sat still in the chair, the phone still in my hand. After all those years together, I never imagined I'd be cast aside like an inconvenience. Yet he'd orchestrated everything as if I were no longer a person, just a financial hurdle to be cleared. I opened my laptop and forwarded the messages and recordings to Vivian with a single line. We have more evidence. They planned this from the start. Less than 5 minutes later, she called back. I'm opening the files now. Colette, this is gold. Not just for the financial case, but for freezing upcoming transactions. The voices, the content, the timeline, they all align. I nodded silently. Vivian paused, then added, I'll contact the financial investigation team tonight. With a bit of luck, we can freeze the retirement account before they touch it. I hung up, stood, and walked toward the living room window. Outside, the streetlights glowed soft and golden, and snow had started to fall. In that quiet darkness, I realized something. I was no longer the woman who'd been left behind. I was the one who had survived. And I was finally beginning to see the way out of the shadows, where truth could no longer be buried. I didn't sleep that night. Not from pain, but because my mind was overflowing with puzzle pieces locking into place. Everything David had done was calculated. Every word he'd spoken to me, from those fake embraces to his advice that I pause my projects to rest, had been part of a carefully arranged game he thought he'd win. What he didn't know was that I'd never been one to sit still and let others write my fate. The next morning, I called Marcus, the man tracking David's finances and movements in Seattle. I need a very specific link, I said. Not to tail him like in a spy movie, but to catch the exact moment he slips. Marcus replied in his usual calm voice. I've had someone keeping tabs on him since yesterday. You'll have your first report by the end of the day. But here's something interesting from this morning. He went to a luxury car dealership and test drove a brand new Mercedes S-Class. Told the staff he's expecting a big payout from recently sold stock. I pressed my lips together. My anger didn't flare. It simmered low, steady like embers beneath ash. He really thought he had it all handled. That he could use the joint account funds to buy himself a freedom present. But I had a plan of my own. At the studio, I asked my assistant to print a custom engagement card. Not a regular card. I'd asked Marcus to embed a tiny tracking chip and micro camera inside. On the cover, embossed on pearl-colored paper, were the words, "Wishing you both a joyful new beginning filled with love, C." No names, no threats, no bitterness. Just a tasteful, harmless gift. But inside it held everything I needed. Proof David was living with Jenna, the exact location, their interaction caught on camera when they opened it, and the precise time the delivery was received. Marcus arranged for a courier to hand-deliver it that afternoon. 1 hour later, I received the footage. David stepped out of a small third-floor apartment, white shirt half-buttoned, hair still damp, coffee cup in hand. Jenna followed in a nightgown, smiling brightly. He opened the package, saw the card, frowned briefly, then laughed aloud. "What the hell is this? Who even sends stuff like this?" He chuckled, handing the card to Jenna. She read the card out loud, then burst out laughing. "Looks like someone sending their blessings. Maybe an old coworker. Or Colette pretending to be gracious," David said with a shrug. "Either way, at least we know someone's watching." I stopped the video there. I'd seen enough. The location data was clear. They were at the exact address Marcus had suspected. It confirmed they were living together. Even their daily routines were now time-stamped with precision. That evening, Vivian called back. He just submitted a deposit request for the car. The dealership forwarded his financial documentation to the bank for verification. "I've already sent legal alerts to both the bank and the showroom." I turned on speakerphone and stepped out onto the balcony, holding a cup of hot tea in my hands. How did they respond? The bank called back to confirm they've frozen all major transactions in David's name due to suspicion of marital asset fraud. The car purchase may be suspended indefinitely. Vivian paused. "I also sent a formal warning to his legal representative. Their team is in an emergency meeting." I leaned against the railing, feeling a strange lightness, as if I had just placed the first brick of something entirely new. But it wasn't triumph. It was clarity. The moment I fully realized I was no longer the passive piece in someone else's game. Vivian continued. "I imagine he'll respond aggressively. But like you said, this isn't revenge. This is legal self-defense." I smiled faintly. "Do you remember the day he called my studio a hobby with no future?" "I do," Vivian said, her voice low but steady. "And I also remember, you were the only client I've ever had who insisted on a separate contract for every single expense." "Maybe it's because I used to fear losing too much," I said quietly. "Now I just want to protect what's rightfully mine. And let others lose what they never truly valued." That night, I watched the video of David and Jenna opening the card again. There was a fleeting moment, just a flicker, when David saw the signature, he and his brow furrowed. A hesitation, like something in his subconscious knew this wasn't just a kind gesture. Like deep down, he sensed he'd underestimated a woman far less fragile than he believed. And what was coming wouldn't be just a greeting card. It was a chilly Saturday afternoon when I drove out of central Denver toward a quiet suburban area, more than an hour away. I'd found Darlene's address through an old public record file Vivian had sent me the week before. At first I hesitated. I wasn't sure if Darlene would even want to see me, or if she had already left that chapter of her life behind. But something inside me needed to know. Not out of curiosity, but because if anyone knew David better than I did, it was the woman who carried his last name before I did. Darlene's small house sat at the end of a tree-lined street, the red maples arching over like an old, protective canopy. The roof was aged but well kept, with flower baskets hanging neatly under the eaves. I parked, stepped out, and took a deep breath before knocking on the door. A woman in her early 40s answered. Her short chestnut hair framed a pair of sharp but guarded eyes. She looked at me for a few seconds, then spoke. "Colette, right?" I nodded, surprised. "You know me." Darlene gave a small, tight smile. "I have the internet. And a few friends still in Denver." She stepped aside. Come in. I think I know why you're here. Her living room was simple and tidy, with the soft scent of peppermint tea lingering in the air. I sat on a beige upholstered chair while she poured tea from a teal ceramic kettle. David still hasn't learned a damn thing, has he? She said, handing me a cup. I gave a bitter smile. I don't think he plans to. He just wants to win. Darlene sat across from me, quiet for a moment, then spoke, her voice firm and even. I used to love him. That's the hardest thing to admit. Took me years. I didn't respond, just looked at her. There's a strange kind of understanding between women who've loved the same man, especially when that man destroyed both their trust. He left me the same year I found out I had an ectopic pregnancy, Darlene continued, her tone steady. While I was in the hospital, David quietly drained our joint account and transferred the money into a business account under a friend's name. Then he filed for divorce and claimed I was cold and distant. My throat tightened. But I got lucky, Darlene said, sipping her tea. My cousin's a forensic accountant. He helped me track down most of the hidden assets. David was forced to transfer back part of his company shares as a settlement. After that, I left Portland and disappeared. He never mentioned you, I murmured. Because I made him lose, Darlene said. For the first time, a flicker of satisfaction lit up her eyes. And men like David don't talk about the women who outplayed them. I reached into my folder and pulled out a stack of documents. I have evidence he's still pulling the same stunts. Recordings, texts, falsified financial statements. But I want to understand what happened in your case. If we can prove a pattern of behavior, it could give us serious leverage in court. Darlene opened the folder, flipping through the pages like she was reading through old scars. I kept everything. Fake power of attorney forms, suspicious transfers, even a list of offshore accounts he once tried to set up through a friend in Eugene. I stared. He tried moving money overseas? Didn't succeed, Darlene shrugged. I caught on too early. But the attempt alone was enough to sway the court against him on every asset division point. I don't want to keep these documents anymore. If you can use them, they're yours. I accepted the folder she slid across the table, my hand trembling, not out of shock but because I realized I wasn't alone. Thank you, I said sincerely. I thought I was the only one who didn't see through him in time. Darlene placed her hand gently over mine, her eyes softer. We weren't stupid, Colette. We just trusted the wrong person. And that's not a crime. I squeezed her hand back, feeling something quietly mend inside me. Two women, two pasts, but the same scar, now becoming a shield instead of a wound. I left Darlene's house as dusk settled. The cold air stung my face as I opened the car door, but there was a strange warmth in my chest. In what had felt like a lonely battle, I had found an unexpected ally. And David had no idea. That morning, the sky was overcast, the sun hidden behind thick gray clouds, cold like the mood of those walking into the courtroom. I wore a tailored gray suit, neat and composed, not to impress but to remind myself that today wasn't about lost love. It was about exposing the truth. Vivian walked beside me holding a worn leather case thick with files. We won't have to say much, she murmured as we entered the plaintiff's section. The evidence will speak for itself. David was already seated across from us. He wore a deep burgundy blazer, hair combed perfectly, but his face couldn't hide the tension. I caught him glancing my way, hesitation in his eyes. Maybe he'd heard about the asset freeze warning. Maybe Jenna had grown distant after the arguments Marcus had reported. The judge entered, an older woman, her voice low and commanding. She opened the hearing with a reminder for all parties to maintain honesty and respect for the court. Vivian began. No theatrics, no embellishment. She cited item by item. The old financial authorization David had signed, the series of unusual transfers from our joint account in the days leading up to his divorce filing. Your Honor, Vivian said steadily, my client was not only betrayed emotionally, but financially targeted in a premeditated scheme that spanned several months. These actions weren't impulsive, they were calculated. Then she played the video clip from the engagement card, the one of David opening the envelope, Jenna beside him laughing. Every chuckle rang out clearly in the courtroom, which had gone utterly silent. David frowned. His attorney immediately stood to object, citing unauthorized use of private footage. But Vivian calmly presented documentation verifying that the camera was legally embedded in a mailed card, not violating any privacy in a public access setting. The judge nodded. Proceed. Vivian then presented a message exchange between David and his closest friend. One Marcus had retrieved after David carelessly synced his old phone to an iCloud account I still had access to. In that message, David wrote verbatim, "Once I drain the money and cash out retirement, I'll cut Jenna loose gently. She really thinks I love her, so naive." The air in the room froze. Jenna, seated in the back row, turned pale. She had been summoned as a witness per the court's request and hadn't looked at David even once since entering the courtroom. I caught her glance at me, fleeting. But I didn't respond. I felt no jealousy, no anger. Just recognition in her eyes, of being used the same way I once was. The judge turned toward her. "Miss Matthews, would you like to give a statement?" Jenna stood, her voice so soft the court reporter had to ask her to speak louder. I didn't know about the money he took," Jenna said, eyes glued to the floor. "I thought it was savings he already had. He told me his ex-wife had agreed to a peaceful divorce, no conflict. Were you aware of his plan to cut you loose after achieving his financial goal?" the judge asked, voice calm but razor sharp. Jenna shook her head, tears beginning to fall. "No. I had no idea. I really thought he loved me." David turned to whisper something to her, but Jenna raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Do you need a break?" the judge asked gently. Jenna shook her head, then exhaled sharply. "I don't want to be part of this anymore. I respectfully withdraw my testimony and request to leave the hearing." The judge nodded after confirming she wasn't being coerced. Jenna gathered her purse and walked out quickly without looking back. David called after her softly, "Jenna." But she didn't stop. The silence left behind by the closing door was the loudest sound in the room. Vivian lifted her head and continued presenting the sequence of financial transactions David had orchestrated to hide money, including documents provided by Darlene, his ex-wife before me. Those records proved this wasn't his first attempt to dodge financial obligations during a marriage. "The court will review all submitted evidence," the judge said once Vivian finished. "But as of now, there is sufficient cause to freeze any assets that may be linked to fraudulent activity." David gripped the arm of his chair, face ashen. His lawyer attempted a weak defense, blaming it all on impulsive decisions made under emotional stress, but no one in the courtroom believed it anymore. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to shout for justice. Everything had been laid out, undeniable. And the man who once believed he could manipulate everyone had just lost his final supporter outside of the law. 2 days after the hearing, I was in a meeting with my design team at the studio when Vivian texted me a single message. "It started." I immediately understood what she meant. And she was right. All accounts under David's name had been frozen by court order. The bank confirmed he no longer had access. No withdrawals, no transfers. Any property under active transfer, including the Seattle condo under Jenna's name but co-financed, was placed on hold pending investigation. Vivian called me later that afternoon. Her voice was calm as always, but I could hear the restrained satisfaction behind each word. "He tried moving the remainder of the investment fund into a new account using just his initials, but the bank flagged it in time. David's legal team hasn't responded yet. I assume they're trying to gather the pieces." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't celebrating. There was no gloating in me. Just a steady awareness that justice was finally beginning to take shape. That evening I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but then I saw the caller ID, Mrs. Carter, Sr. The woman on the other end no longer spoke with the pride I remembered. Her voice was thin, subdued, and trembling. "Colette, it's me, David's mother." I stayed quiet for a moment. She was the one who had called me right after David left, blaming me for being cold, for destroying the family. I remembered her words clearly. No man walks away from his wife unless he's pushed to the edge. And now she was calling again. I said nothing. I waited. "I saw everything," she said slowly, as though it took effort. "I can't believe what David's done. I thought I raised a decent man." "It's not your fault," I said evenly. "David chose that path. No one forced him. I was wrong to blame you," she continued, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I had no idea he'd been planning this for months. He came home saying you didn't love him anymore, that you only cared about work. I believed him. I nodded, though she couldn't see. Would you meet with me? She asked after a pause. Not to defend him, but to apologize to you. And if possible, to return something our family took from you. I sat up straighter. I don't need anything. Not from you. I just hope no one says I was the one who ruined things. I understand, she whispered. Thank you for still being kind. After that call, I received a stream of messages from David's extended family, the same people who had always smiled at me politely but never really stood on my side. Now they sent apologies. One even wrote, "If only we had known sooner." I didn't reply to any of them. I wasn't angry. I just didn't need them anymore. The next morning, Marcus sent me a photo. David stood outside the headquarters of his former company, holding a briefcase, visibly shaken. Internal sources confirmed he'd been officially terminated for breaching professional ethics, specifically for his undisclosed relationship with a subordinate and the financial misconduct exposed by the press. The company's HR department issued an internal memo. We do not tolerate any abuse of authority for personal gain in a professional environment. I stared at the photo for a long while. The man who once stood beside me and promised we'd build everything together now stood alone, under the harsh midday sun in November, looking utterly lost. I didn't pity him, but I didn't feel triumphant either. It felt still. Later that afternoon, Vivian stopped by my office. He placed a thick folder on my desk and looked at me. We're entering the final phase, she said. The court will issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Based on everything, testimonies, documents, his behavior after the hearing, everything is in your favor. I nodded. As long as I get to keep what's mine. Nothing more. Vivian smiled, rare but genuine. And I think this time you're not just keeping what's yours. You're proving you never really lost it. We didn't say anything else. Outside the glass wall, the sunset painted the street in golden hues. A part of me that had been buried by David was slowly standing back up. Stronger, deeper, not for anyone else, but for myself. 9 months after the court ruling that settled everything, I stood in the center of a wide, sunlit lobby, surrounded by mounted perspective drawings, fabric swatches, and wood samples neatly laid out on a long glass table. This was no longer the small studio where I started with 2 concept sketches and a loyal returning client. This was the new headquarters of Colette Company, a luxury interior design firm entering its fastest growth phase since inception. I had lost a marriage, but maybe that was what led me back to a path I'd long forgotten, sacrificed in the name of being a good wife. Back when I was with David, I always limited myself to just enough projects. Enough to stay safe, to remain stable, to avoid outshining him. But now, with no one to ask permission from, I began pushing my vision further. The first major contract came from a boutique hotel chain in Colorado. The project manager called to say she'd read an interview I gave in a national financial magazine. I still remember the headline, "From Broken to Built: How One Woman Reconstructed Her Future from Ruins." I wasn't fond of the word empire, but I understood why they used it. It wasn't about scale, it was about the weight of the journey. I accepted the hotel project, not just for the contract value, but because I knew I was ready to lead a larger team and finally pursue dreams that had once been smothered by the eyes of someone who didn't believe in them. Darlene was the first person I thought of when I needed a full-time financial advisor. I visited her on a June afternoon, carrying a detailed expansion plan. She read through the documents, then looked up. "You seriously want me to do this?" "I need someone who's not just good with numbers," I said, "but who understands the value of surviving. And I don't know anyone better than you." Darlene said nothing for a moment. Then she nodded and smiled. "All right then. Let's rebuild. And this time no one's getting in our way." We worked together with uncanny synergy. She was thorough and methodical, always asking why before every figure. I was instinctive with vision and aesthetics, able to look at a layout and know what emotional element was missing. Over time our team grew. Young designers started reaching out, not just for the rising reputation of the firm but because they sensed something different in us. There was no room for compromise when it came to justice. By early fall, I received an invitation from a women's entrepreneurship conference in Chicago. The organizers asked me to share both my personal story and my business strategies post-crisis. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to reopen wounds that had once kept me up at night. But Vivian was the one who convinced me. "You're not telling your story to complain," she said. "You're telling it so others know they're not alone." Because of that, I said yes. The conference took place in a hall that was formal but warm. I stepped onto the stage with a microphone in hand, looking out at hundreds of women of all ages. I spoke about being left without a word, about the drained accounts, about the old phone filled with secrets he forgot to erase. I shared the story of the engagement card and the video that turned a trial upside down. But I also shared what I had reclaimed: my studio, my self-worth, my belief in who I was. When I finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the ventilation. Then someone began to clap. And then the entire room stood, their applause rolling forward like a wave. I didn't cry. I just bowed my head and said thank you. Because I was seen not for what I had lost, but for who I had become. That evening, back at the hotel, I received a text from Darlene. "You were incredible today. And yes, no one's stopping us now." I looked out the window where city lights shimmered against the glass. I thought of the courtroom, of David's expression in the moment everything collapsed around him, and of myself, standing here no longer the same woman. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I had used it as the foundation to rebuild from the ground up. On a quiet morning in early December, while reviewing the interior concept for a new beachfront hotel in Santa Barbara, my assistant handed me a worn brown envelope, stamped from a financial rehabilitation facility in Idaho. I recognized the handwriting immediately: slanted, firm, the ink slightly smeared as if the writer had paused for a long time before each sentence. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. I brought it back to my office, closed the door, brewed a cup of Earl Grey, then sat down and ran my fingers across the textured paper. My heart didn't race. I wasn't nervous. Just quietly curious, like opening a book you've already finished, one you haven't touched in years. Inside was a handwritten letter from David. The words meandered, some lines scratched out, others stalling mid-thought as if he'd lost his way in his own sentences. "Colette, I wasn't going to write. Because I know I don't deserve a reply. But here, where there's no power, no assets, no one left to blame, a person starts to look directly at themselves. I should have treated better the only person who ever truly understood me." I paused there, eyes on the darkened ink. He had pressed harder into the page. Was it genuine remorse, or simply what happens when the world you built on lies finally caves in? I couldn't say. I thought I was smart enough to control everything. That I could start over with someone younger, easier, less confrontational. But I didn't realize that someone like you, steady, silent, clear-eyed, was the one person I could never replace. I saw your name in the news. I saw you speak. I saw you standing in the spotlight as if you were born to be there. And I understood. I didn't just lose a wife. I lost the only person who ever stood by me, even when I didn't deserve it. I set the letter down for a moment. Something in those words made me feel sadness, not for myself but for David. Not because he was living in a financial rehabilitation center, but because it took him this long to recognize the value of what he'd lost. And maybe it was already too late to fix any of it. I folded the letter gently. No anger. No bitterness. I simply stood up, walked over to the old wooden cabinet behind my desk, and took out a small chestnut box darkened by time. Inside were things I hadn't kept to remember, but to remind myself that some wounds do heal, yet still deserve acknowledgement. The divorce papers. A bank statement showing the drained account. Our old wedding photo. And now, a handwritten letter from a financial rehab facility. I closed the box softly, like closing a chapter that no longer hurt. A knock came at the door. My assistant peeked in, eyes bright. "They're ready. Everyone's waiting in the lobby." I smiled, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office into the expansive lobby of our third branch. A space bathed in natural light, with high ceilings and glass walls opening to distant mountain views. The air buzzed with laughter and excited conversation. The guests were a mix: longtime clients, new partners, local press, investors, and even a few young students hoping to learn. Darlene stood near the reception table, wearing an olive green blazer, holding a champagne flute. He caught my eye and gave a wink. "We did it," she said, no further explanation needed. I nodded, then made my way to the podium. As the lights came up, the room fell silent. I didn't speak about David. I didn't mention what was lost. I only spoke of how a woman can walk through pain without letting it define her. I talked about rebuilding, about the quiet power of preparation, and the miracle of no longer needing to prove yourself to anyone unworthy. When I finished, I invited everyone to the showcase area, where our design models were displayed like art pieces. Just near the glass doors, a small plaque hung, beautifully engraved on matte white wood. The words were simple but said everything. Success is not revenge. It's freedom. I stood there, champagne in hand, eyes scanning the plaque, the lights, the kind faces smiling back at me. Freedom, it wasn't about escaping something. It was about standing in the very place where pain once lived and knowing it no longer held power over you. And in that moment, I didn't need anyone's forgiveness from the past. Because I had chosen peace, and that would always be enough. I don't know what you'll think as you hear this story. Maybe you've gone through something similar. Maybe you're standing on the edge between letting go and holding on, between being hurt and protecting yourself. If so, I want to say this: you are not alone. Every woman has her limit, but also the strength to rise through what once seemed impossible. I don't share this to dwell on pain, but to show that even when everything falls apart, you can rebuild your life from within with your own hands, your own resolve. Success isn't about vengeance. It's about reminding yourself that you are worthy of freedom, peace, and a life where you never have to ask permission to be yourself. If you've ever thought of giving up, I invite you, pause and look deeper. Sometimes, right at the edge of collapse, a new door quietly opens. And if my story helped you see something in yourself, whether it's a bit of strength, a sense of clarity, or just the comfort of being understood, leave a comment below. I read every single one and carry your words with care. And if you love honest stories about family, life, heartbreak, and rising again from what once felt unbearable, don't forget to follow the channel. There are many more stories ahead, glimpses of real life that might help you reflect and maybe breathe a little easier.